am DJ and I am an alcoholic. My sobriety date is March 6, 2007. I have a sponsor, Brendan D. I have a home group. It's the We Are Not Saints group of Alcoholics Anonymous. We meet on Sunday nights from 7 to 8 p.m. We have childcare. We also fellowship the first Sunday of every month at 5:30 if you'd like to come out and join us. I have service positions within that group. I am that group's GSR. I'm also the childcare coordinator and the alternate lockup opener. So with that said, I just want to say, Wyatt, it was awesome to hear you up here talking about your story. It is very brave to get in a car with someone you don't know. It's by somebody else. My story is not much different than Wyatt's. I grew up in a house in Edmonds, and my mom and dad were married for a long time, and he was an alcoholic. Both sides of my family have alcoholism, and when my parents separated, I was devastated. My dad was my hero. I got to drink off of his beer, his other drinks growing up, right? I got to see how he drank, and he used to let me make his screwdrivers for him. And I would pour so much vodka and then have a little bit of splash of color, right? And my dad would be like, "That was a good one, boy." So like watching that, I'm like, okay, that's how you drink, right? That's not what made me an alcoholic though. And I didn't even know he was an alcoholic at that time. Later on, I would go up and live with my dad, and I did not fit in where I lived. I didn't make friends easy up there. One of those people that was up there is in this room today, and is one of my best friends. But I did not make friends easy early on. And the first time I got really drunk, it was over on the reservations in LaConner. And I remember watching everybody taking pulls off this bottle. And I'm counting as they're drinking. And I'm like, okay, I can do better than that. I can do better than that person. And then it came to me, and I took that swig, and I was counting my swig, and I was like, it started getting warm, right? And like the way I like to describe it was like the blanket that comes out of the dryer that your mom wraps you in. That's what alcohol is doing for me, And it went around again the second time. I didn't count. I just started down. And I was doing this to impress a girl, by the way. And I didn't actually impress her. She was quite annoyed by how drunk I got, and I got the walk of shame home. My friends propped me up against the door. They knocked and left, and then I had to deal with my dad the next morning. But that was my first drunk, and I was chasing that every time I drank. I was chasing that feeling, that warmth and that escape, that confidence, everything that alcohol made me, right? I was chasing that, and I could never get that feeling, and I'd always overshoot the mark. I was always blacking out. I don't think I ever drank and just was cool with a buzz. It was always black out, pass out, wake up in somebody's yard. And my dad passed away when just a couple days after I turned 17. And from there I spiraled, right? Because my hero died. And I started drinking more often. It was just on the weekends, but then it became the weekdays. It was basketball season. I was showing up to basketball practice drunk. And things got worse. Drugs are a part of my story. I know this is Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm going to keep to the singleness of purpose. But they are part of my story. And, I would continue on. Somehow I managed to graduate high school, and I continued on with my drinking and other things. And then I got this gal pregnant. I was working for a company. It's one of the only times I had a job. And I was working for this company and got this gal pregnant. And my drinking, because I would black out, I did some really horrible, mean things to her. And she ended up getting pregnant. And then she wanted nothing to do with me. And when she had the baby, I got to talk to her, and she said, I had the baby, and it's a boy. And she told me his name. And then she said, I didn't put you on the birth certificate because I don't want that for him. Seeing my dad as my hero, I also wanted to be a dad, right? After my dad passed away. And so this was a crushing blow. And so what's the point, right? Let's just go to oblivion after this. And a few years later, I met this other gal, no intentions of being in a real relationship. I was homeless, needed a place to stay. She got pregnant. And I remember telling her often, after she told me she was pregnant, I'm going to stop drinking. I'm going to stop everything. I just need to go out. I need to get it out of my system. Just give me like one good night. And that one good night kept getting pushed out because there was always a reason. I just wasn't satisfied, right? That obsession had me. Like after losing one child, I'm about to lose another. And I found out she was pregnant around 2-3 months. And then, all of a sudden it was 9 months and she's having the baby. And I remember when my oldest son was born and I got to hold him, I got to cut that umbilical cord. I probably still smelled like alcohol. And I just remember bursting into tears. And my mom's like, "Oh, you're happy." I'm like, "Yeah." And I wasn't. I mean, part of me was, right? But I wasn't because I knew I was going to mess this up. And I knew that my drinking and the other things I was doing was going to cause me to lose this child too. Now, any normal person probably would have stopped back when, early on. And somebody with some heavy drinking might have stopped like after the baby was born, but I didn't. I kept going. It got worse, you know. I believe God's always been in my life, and it's interesting. We say coincidences happen all the time, but it's not. And I've learned through my first sponsor that the coincidences that happened in my life were God's hand. And 6 months after my son Cody was born, I got arrested and charged with a felony. And I was just going to hide it. I was just going to stay in the jail and not say anything. And I go up to check in my property in the Snohomish County Jail, and I hear this, "What the hell, DJ?" And I'm like, "Oh my God, who knows my name in here?" And standing across from me is my aunt, and she's checking in my property. And she says, "I can't do this anymore, so I'm gonna have someone else come here, but I'm gonna go call your mom." I'm like, "No, don't." But she did. And, God weaves his way into all this stuff. My mom, both my sisters showed up. My sister was back from Boston College. She was studying to be an attorney. And she just happened to be in the courtroom that day. I was on the video. I'm in jail wearing my nice green and white jumper. And the judge says, "We're not going to release you on your own recognizance because you're a flight risk." And my sister, I don't know what she said. She said it in lawyer language and got me PR'd. And I would say I stayed sober for 3 days after that. But then the mental torture was so much that I drank, right? And then it was back to everything as normal. And eventually I entered this program in Snohomish County that helps you get rid of your felonies. And part of that requirement was that I had to go to meetings 3 times a week. I had to take UAs up to 5 times a week and breathalyzers. So I started this program. I entered it willingly. And I didn't know how I was going to stay clean. I didn't know how I was going to do the things. And here's the thing. When I first came into AA, I'm a liar, by the way. I'm a liar. And when I first came into AA, when the judge asked me my sobriety date, I said December 28, 2005. That was my arrest date. There's no way I'm staying clean that long. And the judge says, "Okay." And so now, mind you, I lied to this judge, and I watched him put people in jail like that same day for lying to him. And I'm like, "Oh man, I just screwed up." And I'm like, "How do I maintain this lie?" So I started showing up. I went to this very first AA meeting in Everett. I walked in and I looked around at everybody in the room and I went, "Nope." And I walk up to the guy that was running the meeting. I said, "Can you sign this?" He said, "Sure." He signed it. I said, "Okay, well, the meeting part's going to be easy, right? How do I do the staying sober part?" So I went to the second meeting that I went to. It was down in Edmonds. It was at the senior center. And I loved this guy for what he did. I walk into the meeting. I showed up early so that I could get my slip signed before everyone showed up. I see this guy sitting up and I say, "Hey man, would you mind signing my slip?" He said, "Sure, let me see it." And so I hand it to him. He opens it up and looks at it and folds it back up, puts it in his pocket. I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm going to sign it for you, but you'll get it back at the end of the meeting. Until that time, how about you come with me and we can set up, we can make coffee, you can help me put out chairs." Right? This is God acting for me, right? God does things that I can't do, right? And while I was sitting in that meeting, a friend of mine that I knew from school showed up in this meeting, and I went over and approached him. And I said, "How you doing?" He said, "Good." He goes, "How long have you been sober?" I said, "I've been sober since December 28, 2005. He goes, "Okay." And he says, you look like you could use some help. And I said, no, I think I got it. He goes, okay, well, if you decide you want some help, my home group's on Friday. I'll introduce you to some people. And so I don't know why I show up to things like that's not my MO. Like the judge said, I'm a flight risk. I showed up that Friday, and this friend walks me over to this guy who, in my mind, knows nothing about alcoholism, knows nothing about being sober. He just looks like a preppy kind of cool dude, right? And he says, DJ, this is Kenny. And he's DJ. And then my friend just gets up and walks out the building and leaves me here with this guy that I think knows nothing. And Kenny asked me, he said, you think you need some help? And I said, I don't know. That's probably the first real honest answer I had. I don't know. Well, if you do, here's my phone number. Call me this weekend, and then we can set something up. And again, I went about my day, thought about it, and I called him. That Monday, I was at his house, and I showed up to his house. I was sitting, he said, don't be late. So I was like, okay, well, I got to be early. So I was sitting down the street about an hour early, waiting to pull into his driveway because I did not want to be told to not come in. And so when I came in there, Kenny he said, he pulls out his wallet, pulls out his phone, he sets it next to me. I can see the money. I'm like, is this guy crazy? He's putting money in front of me. And he said, we're going to get quiet. He turned down the lights and lit some candles. We're going to get quiet, and then we're going to do a prayer. I was like, oh man, I did not sign up for this. And I stayed. I stayed in that room. I stayed there, and I closed my eyes, and I would peek and see if he was still there, make sure I wasn't getting punked or something. And I stayed. And then he talked about, we opened up the book, and he gave me a prayer, and I wrote it down. And then we talked about the title page, and that he had me draw that circle and triangle. And he started he made a promise to me that day. He said that if I worked the three sides of that triangle, unity, service, and recovery, that I'd be safe and protected from the drink. And that was true. I was still lying though. And I met with that man every week, and we read the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was going to meetings still. I was saying my sobriety date was in December 2005, and it was eating me up. And I remember doing my fifth step, did this amazing inventory, so good. And I did the fifth step with my sponsor, and I read it to him, and he said, are you leaving anything out? I said, no. And I'm thinking to myself, does he know something that I don't know? And he says, okay, well, this is your opportunity to, get all the skeletons out of the closet. And I didn't do it. I was afraid. Fear still had me, right? And so I did 6, 7. I started my list of the amends I had to make. And I started making amends. I started making the quote unquote easy ones, right? The ex-girlfriends. They were not easy. I got to hear some horrible things that I did while drunk. And I was, not a very nice person back then. And I was putting off this one really big amends that should have been the easy one. It was my mom. And Kenny said, no, you're just going to have to pray to God to have that opportunity, And so I said, okay, cool, that's easy. So I started saying this prayer every time I'd go over to my mom's house, because my grandpa was living with her at the time. And I said this prayer that, all right, God, if my grandpa's not there today, I'll make this amends. I pull in, he stands there. Cool, we're not making the amends today. I go in, he's sitting in his chair. And I did that for about a month. And I said that prayer every single time, because I told Kenny I would. Then I pull in one afternoon, I say the prayer, kind of really cocky about it. Okay, God, if Grandpa's not here, I will make the amends, knowing his van's right there. And I walk in, and he's not sitting in his chair. Mom, where's Grandpa? Oh, he went to Canada with your uncles. Oh, Jesus Christ. All right. I said, do you have time to hear my amends with you? She said, sure. And so I went out and grabbed my book, and I grabbed my 3x5 card, and I went in and I told her how I thought I harmed her. And I got to that part. Did I leave anything out? Is there anything you'd like to tell me how I made you feel? And she says, no, but I would like to tell you something. And I'm going to get emotional here, but maybe. Um, she started saying, you know, you may have thought you got the short end of the stick growing up. You may have thought your sister was the favorite. And she started listing out these resentments I had. And it was like, oh my God, what the hell is going on here? You know, and she goes, I just want you to know you're my firstborn child and you hold a special place in my heart. And like, it was like everything melted away. And I just realized why these steps are in order, you know. And after talking to her that day and then talking to her a little bit more, she said, I want you to do something with your life now. And I said, okay. She's like, I'm going to pay for you to go back to school. And so I enrolled in Everett College. I started nursing school. I did not like it. I bombed out of it. And she says, the offer's still on the table if you can find something you really want. And I went into the addiction program at Edmonds College, and I had a pretty close to 4.0, and I graduated and I started working in that field. You know, but that's in part to do this program and to God, you know. And you know, I graduated this felony program shortly after this, and I started thinking to myself, I got to get this lie off me. And I started thinking, maybe it'd be good if I just take a drink. I can reset my time. No one will know anything about it. And, you know, again, God does for me what I can't do for myself. I go over to my sponsor's house for dinner. He's got multiple people over there, and he could see something's bothering me. We went in the back room, we talked, and I said, I'm thinking about drinking. And he does his little laugh. Huh? Why do you think about drinking? And I said, I've been lying this whole time. And so he goes, you think that's a good idea? And I said, I don't know. And we opened up the book again. He says, you know, the stories you've told me probably won't come back from it. And he's right. I wouldn't have. You know, that was my brain, my delusional thinking I was, you know, able to beat this thing. And, you know, I was like, okay, so what do I do? He's like, well, you went to how many meetings? And I'm like, I don't know, a lot. He said, make a list of them. And I said, then what? And he goes, then you're going to go to every meeting and you're going to stand up when it's open or when you're called on, and then you're going to tell them that you lied about your sobriety date. Jesus Christ, that's a lot. So then we go out and we're going back out to the dinner room, and I see his wife there, and I absolutely adore her. And she says, I tell her what's going on because I'm starting to be honest now for the first time. And she's like, oh, DJ, you're not special and no one cares. And I was like, oh, that did not feel good, you know? And so I'm like, okay. And what she meant by that was like, I'm not special because there's a lot of people that lie about their sobriety dates, right? And no one cares about where I've been and what I've done. They just care about what I'm doing now, you know? And, you know, I'll say this, like Kenny and I had to figure out what my sobriety date was because I don't know what it is. March 6, 2007, I have a slip of paper that says when I UA'd, and that was a clean UA. So that's what I go off of because I don't know, you know. And I started working with guys shortly after that. I, you know, was working with a lot of guys, and none of them were getting past Bill's story. And I went to Kenny. I'm like, I don't think I'm doing this right. And he's like, you're staying sober. And I said, yeah. Then I spoke at the Linwood Delano Club, and this gentleman approached me, and we're still friends today. And he asked me if I'd sponsor him because he heard the story about my mom. He wanted that. And so, you know, he was the first guy I took through the book. The second guy I took through the book had 19 years sober, and he was sent to me by Kenny. And when he came to me, I didn't know what I was supposed to do with this guy. And I went back to Kenny. I told him I'd sponsor him. And I went back to Kenny and I go, this guy's got 19 years. I've got like 2. What am I supposed to do? He goes, you're going to read the book. I said, okay. And I said, but Kenny, he's got 19 years. Kenny goes, what does his face look like? I said, hopeless. You know, and that's the thing that Kenny taught me early on was we seek out the face of hopelessness. And at 19 years, this guy was just as hopeless as when he came in the program. He left the program He stopped doing the things that got him to where he was, and he was back hopeless as ever. He hadn't drank, but he was doing things that was blocking him from the sunlight of the Spirit. And it's funny because, like, if I had been paying attention, God put that guy in my life for a reason. I too walked away from the program. At about 8 years sober, I walked away. And I thought I was too good for this program. I thought I was better than everyone. I was working in my dream job. It was me, me, me. God was no longer there. Mm-hmm. My current sponsor tells me that I went back to sleep, that I was no longer awake. And so life was good for a few years. Like, it didn't get bad until right before COVID. I ended up getting a divorce from someone that I married in program. I got into another relationship, and then that relationship ended. And when that second relationship ended, I wasn't devastated, but something was off. And a friend of mine had seen that I changed my relationship status online and called me up and says, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm good." And he's like, "Well, I noticed your Facebook post." And I'm like, "I didn't post anything." And he said, "Well, your relationship status changed. And, I think we should go to a meeting." I said, "Okay." And he goes, "What meeting do you want to go to?" I'm like, I don't know. And I had not been back to my home group in 10 years. I'd been coming to meetings here and there to help other people. But I had not been to my home group. And for whatever reason, I said, "We are not saints." He goes, "All right, let's go get dinner beforehand and then we'll go." So I show up to this meeting and I get called on. And I'm like, why are they calling on me? And, I don't know why I said what I said, but I was homesick. I was homesick for AA. I was homesick for We Are Not Saints. I was homesick for my family. Stop looking at me. And one of the home group members blurts out when she got a chance to talk. She said, "We love you, DJ, and we are glad you're back. Keep coming back." And man, I was like, screw her. What gives you the right to say that to me? I'm supposed to be angry and I'm not supposed to come back here. So I showed up resentful the next week and I got called on again. This time I was toxic. And my shares were toxic for the next month. And so the guy that I had first took through the steps was in this home group as well. And we went up to this meeting up in La Conner, and he's like, "Who are you going to ask to sponsor you now that you're back?" I said, "I'm going to ask Brendan." He goes, "Oh, okay." Brendan goes to this meeting. And I'm like, "Yeah, he's not going to be there." Well, he was there. And I saw Brendan and he walked out the door. And so my buddy's like, "Oh, I just saw him." I said, "Yeah, he left." He goes, "No, he didn't." And so, I'm so blessed to have people in my life that care so much about me that they will like call me out on stuff. And he went and tracked down Brendan and called me over. And he said, "Brendan, DJ has something to ask you. And if he doesn't have the opportunity to ask you tonight, right now, he's going to disappear for 10 years." And so Brendan puts his arm around me and says, "What's up?" And I said, "I need a sponsor." He goes, "Okay, well, let's meet this week and we'll meet here." And I said, "Okay." So I went and bought a brand new book thinking I'm going to get taken through the steps again. I'm like, "Oh, this is going to be so cool. I'm not going to be as toxic." And I show up to the meeting and he goes, "You've been asleep. We need to wake you up." And I said, "Okay." I said, "So we going through the book again?" He goes, "No, you're going to start sponsoring." He said, "You didn't drink?" I said, "No." "You have your book?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "You're going to sponsor. We're going to work on your spiritual condition." And how we worked on my spiritual condition, we started working on 10, 11. And he took me through some other spiritual material that Kenny used to take me through. And slowly but surely, my connection to God started to come back, right? I started to wake back up, and I started to get involved in the home group. I started to take on service positions. I started building a friend network again. There's a group of us, this whole row over here, basically, that started doing meetings together, a traveling meeting together, and we would go to different places and fellowship afterwards. The connection to you all started to resurface. The connection to God was there, and you can't transmit something you don't have. So I sponsored a couple guys, and it did not go well early on. But as soon as I started to wake back up, a couple guys came into my life. And one of them was at inpatient, and I went over to the inpatient facility he was in, and I read to him every single week at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock in the morning. And as soon as he got out, he moved into an Oxford house down the street from mine, and he would come over. And so we'd start meeting. And, the willingness that these two guys have showed me that I needed to pass this stuff on, And I remember, and I tell them this too, everything that Kenny used to tell me about finding that face of hopelessness. And a couple of weeks ago, I was at a meeting, and I heard somebody suffering, and they approached me after the meeting and started talking to me about sponsorship. And I walked away from them, and I got in the car, and I started thinking, I'm like, Jesus, there was somebody asking for help, and I just walked away. So I called that person, and I said, hey, were you asking about sponsorship? And they said, yeah. And so I said, I'm willing to sponsor you if you need that. Think it over and let's talk. And I ended up sponsoring that guy. Whether we have time or we're new, we all suffer at different times. We all go through things. We all can return to that state of hopeless mind and body very easily. We don't even have to take a drink to be there. It's through us being able to check in with each other that, we can see if someone's okay. Sometimes it's just a hug is all you need. Just a welcome. I'm glad to see you. I'm truly glad that the people in the last year and a half that have shown up in my life have been a part of my life. I'm truly happy that, before this meeting today, I got to go get quiet with 4 gentlemen, and we got to, have a little guided meditation and a prayer. My life is so amazing today. I still have that amazing job. On top of that, I got hired on to teach at Edmonds College in the addiction program at the end of last year, and I just taught my first class yesterday. I taught 4 hours, and it was a lot of fun. My oldest son is in college right now. He's trying to finish up a degree in engineering at Edmonds College, and then my youngest, who's 14, Eli, he just entered high school. And he's been doing some clubs, and he found a club that he fell in love with. It's funny because my sister also did this club, but she did it a little bit older, mock trial. And my son wants to probably be an attorney when he grows up. That's not me that did that. That's not his mom that did that. This program provided him the opportunities early on, and now in the last year to see how people show up in his life. I get to show up for my mom. I get to show up for my sister. I get to show up for each one of you. And life is not easy. In fact, it's difficult sometimes. I get scared. And, prior to getting this teaching gig, I got really scared. I almost didn't apply because I was like, I don't deserve this. I'm not good enough. I start to tell myself the things that keeps me from helping others. And, I say this gentleman had said something in a meeting, and I thought he was talking to me, but he told me later on that he wasn't. We hear what we need to hear. This gentleman said something to the effect of like, in the third step, we give our will and our life over to the care of God as we understand him. And that we have to, if we still are in fear, then we're not really giving our life over. And sometimes you just got to cowboy up. And I appreciate that because it snapped me out of where I was. I'm going to finish with this. I'm going to read something that my first sponsor, Kenny, used to read. And I'm going to try to do it without getting emotional, but sometimes that just happens. How are you to come about? You ask, where am I to find these people? You're going to meet these new friends on in your own community. Near you, alcoholics are dying helplessly like people on a sinking ship. If you live in a large place, there are hundreds, high and low, rich and poor. These are the future fellows of Alcoholics Anonymous. Among them, you will make lifelong friends. You'll be bound to them with new and wonderful ties where you will escape disaster together and you will commence shoulder to shoulder your common journey. Then you will know what it means to give yourself that others may survive and rediscover life. You will learn the full meaning of love thy neighbor as thyself. DJ Alcohol, thanks.